Hello Internet, and welcome to The Life of Precht, a Fairy Tale Theory. A video I promised on my last fairy tale review that has been in the works for a long time. I've been waiting to do this for a good long while. But before we jump right on in, just another reminder, I have my Winter 2019 anime review straw poll in the description. You know the drill by now, fill that out. We have 4 days until that closes. Also a reminder, I've gotten a bit of a sore throat, so I do have my trusty water bottle here, if I need that. So I might pause to do that, I've done that before. Anyway, let's jump right on in. Precht Hades, Second Master, whatever you want to call him, is a fascinating figure in the fairy tale universe who's influenced so many characters in so many different ways, from leading Jalal to create the Tower of Heaven, thereby influencing Urza's life, to manipulating Ultir into working for him, and leading to everything that happened with Ultir, founding Fairy Tale, giving a home to the entire cast, guiding Makarov to becoming the Third Master. He's done a lot. However, a lot of his life remains a mystery. And so hopefully by the end of this video, I'll shed a bit more light on what I think lies in the depths of Precht So first, while this video will be part biography, I'm going to go over the parts that we do know for sure. I'm primarily going to be focusing on 3 specific moments of Precht's life that I think are going to answer a lot of questions about him. And I don't want to spoil those because that'll kind of, if I tell you what they are now, you'll kind of figure it out as the video goes on. But anyway, before we get to there, first off, we need to talk about, just because we don't know a moment in Precht's life does not mean that it particularly matters. For example, Precht's birth doesn't really matter. I don't think the way Precht was born has really influenced his actions or influenced the course of Fairy Tale in the way that a lot of his other events did. We also don't know when exactly he joined Sylph Labyrinth or why he joined Sylph Labyrinth. But either way, it doesn't particularly matter. So I'm not going to focus on that either. Also, there's really no way to know why he joined Sylph Labyrinth because there just aren't really any clues to that regard. And then we have things that we do know that also don't really matter into this theory. One of them is that in 686, Precht, Yuri, and Warod came to Tenro Island in search of the Tenro Jade, where they met Mavis, but did not find the Jade, leading them to join up with Mavis to find the Jade, leading them to Magnolia, where the team would then take down the resident guild, the Blue Skull. Mavis would cast an incomplete law spell taught to her by Zareth, being unknowingly cursed by Ank'Sram in the process. That would be very important later on, but not quite yet. In April of that year, the group would found Fairy Tale, and in the years after this, Fairy Tale would gain renown in the Second Trade War, as we saw in episode 289 at the end of 2018, and in the manga, way back in August of 2015. And then 10 years after they founded the guild in X696, Yuri's wife would give birth to a son, Makarov, and quickly die. As I mentioned in my 289 video, I don't think that was caused by Mavis, though Mavis certainly believed it was caused by her, which led her to run away, and leaving Precht as interim master in her stead. In a year later, Zareth shows up with Mavis's corpse. That'll be a big moment in Precht's life. Because that moment to me is the moment that sets Precht down the course that his entire life will take. And we'll see that in more detail as the video goes on. But Zareth showing up with the dead Mavis changes everything for Precht. First of all, he's now the full second master. The first master is dead. It's also his first knowing interaction with Zareth. He had met Zareth a decade earlier, before founding Fairy Tale, but he had no idea who that was, and as a result, that could not really pique his interest in Zareth that we will see consume him by the 780s. But after Zareth leaves not Yuri's corpse, Mavis's corpse on his doorstep and leaves, telling Precht his name, Precht remembers that he has a revival lacrima in his basement. Interestingly, the wiki, when I was researching for this video, just calls it a regular lacrima. I did not quite check if the manga said it was specifically used the term revival lacrima, but I mentioned that in my last review video. That's a kind of weird thing to fit in with Ank'Sram. But anyway, he has this lacrima, he steals Mavis's body in there, becomes the official second guild master of Fairy Tale, and spends the next several decades researching ways to revive Mavis. And that will become the driving force, in my opinion, of Hades' life, of Precht's life. He's still Precht at this point. Even through his time as Grimoire Heart, I believe that reviving Mavis was at least originally the central goal of all of his actions. But anyway, 30 years later, he discovers the eternal magic fairy heart inside Mavis as a result of both her energy in the Lacrima and his research, and that just led to a lot of bad times. Anime fans, you will see just how horrible things get for Fairy Tail. Not talking about quality-wise, talking about, like, the people have plenty of complaints about this arc in general. That will be in much more detail in my review videos and in my manga live reactions from 2016 and 17. But anyway, with this we finally reached the first point I want to cover, and that is Precht's tenure as the Second Master and why it ended. But before we can really talk about that, we need to talk about the Curse of Anxaram. And we don't get all that much detail into Anxaram in Fairy Tail. Even in the manga, he's kind of vague. But we do know that the curse is specifically given to those who, like, mess with treat the boundaries of life and death lightly. We know that somehow the incomplete law gave it to Mavis, and we know that Zeref got it specifically from trying to revive Natsu. Now, according to the series itself, they're the only two known users of Anxaram black magic, the only two known people to use the curse. But I always found that odd, because as we see in this flashback, they aren't the only ones to fuck around with life and death. Precht does it for over 40 years. He spends from X697, when Zeref arrives on his door with Mavis' dead body, up to 736, when he leaves the guild, trying to find ways to revive Mavis. He's the only guildmaster, by the way, who actively tries to revive Mavis. Makarov does not get cursed, presumably. There's no evidence that he gets cursed, because he also does not try to revive Mavis. He just keeps her body sealed in there. But we also know that Precht was not cursed until around 736, when he left. Because as we see in episode 290, Precht ages considerably. We see him in different states of his age in 736. Up into 736, I should say. But when we see Precht give Makarov the mastership, way back in that flashback in Tenro in 736, he is nearly identical to the Hades we see nearly 50 years later in 784. So first of all, we know that Precht, by the time he dies, has to be around 130 years old. You know? Like, he's an old-ass man. And yet he's still kicking ass. You know? Makarov sure kicks ass too, but Makarov, we see, has, when he was a younger man, he was a relatively, normal-sized person. Whereas as an old man, he's like a little midget. Precht, Hades, whatever you want to call him, stays the same height, the same build. His entire body stays the same. Just like what happens with Zeref, and just like what happens with Mavis. Admittedly, Mavis is not cursed for anywhere near as long a time as Precht and Zeref, so her aging would not have been as significant as them anyway, even though with the age Mavis was, her aging actually would have been significant, given that she was probably 13 when she was cursed, and the difference between a 13-year-old and a 23-year-old is significant. But anyway, that's a bit of a digression. So yeah, we know that Precht does not age from 736 to 784. Now, that does lead to a bit of a wrinkle, because Zeref was found and cursed, and Mavis too, were both found and cursed super quickly. You know, Zeref was maybe researching for a few years, whereas Precht seems to have been researching for around 40. Close to, or was it, yeah, 40. I lost my train of thought there for a second. Anyway, so I have a couple theories as to why it took so long for Anxaram to notice Precht as opposed to Zeref, and they're either time or place. When Anxaram cursed Zeref, it was 4 centuries ago in presumably Alakatasia, the continent where Alvarez is. I don't think it ever specifically says that Zeref is from that continent, but I've always presumed so. In the middle of a religion that heavily focused on Anxaram. And it's a common trope in media that gods get their power from worship. And so in Ishgar, where, you know, it took Precht decades to realize that Ankhseram was the reason Mavis had been cursed and had stopped aging, and Zareth and all that. Ankhseram worship has shrunk. If not, it's completely absent. It's only, like, around in old tomes. You know, Precht's a pretty fucking smart guy. He did not know about it for a long-ass time. So yeah. So either it's, he was lost to history, or Ishgard never specifically, or Ankhseram never really took foot in Ishgard. He was a fairly, Amakatasian god. And as a result, Ishgard has its own gods, so to speak. That does raise the question, though, of Mavis. Why does Mavis get cursed like that, whereas it takes 40 years for the curse to come to Precht? And that's probably just because, for Mavis, Ankhseram was reacting to this gigantic, like, spike of magic power in Magnolia, whereas research is notably, like, less prominent. So if Ankhseram's, like, sensing magic power, there's this sudden glow of, like, messing with life and death magic in Ishgard in 686, whereas it took him, like, 40 years to notice, wait a second, there's something weird going on over there, and then he curses Precht. But either way, by 736, or maybe a little bit before then, though I personally believe that it was right before he gave the mastership to Makarov he was cursed. But either way, 40 years later, Ankhseram curses Precht. And it's important to note that we've never actually been told why Precht left Fairy Tail, or why he turned evil. And so Precht having the curse does a lot to answer these questions. Presumably, he, much like Mavis supposedly did before him, killed a Fairy Tail member with the curse on accident, and much like Mavis did, ran away, not wanting to tell the other members what happened, and so he simply gave the leadership to Makarov, and, like, got the fuck out of town. And while he was out of town, while he left, I personally believe that he continued, that even after he ran away, reviving Mavis was still his chief priority. And that leads to my second point. Why search for Zareth? We're told over the course of the Tenro arc, it's, with Zareth awakened, I just, like, researched this, so it's a little bit fuzzy in my mind. It's been a long time since I read Tenro. That with Zareth awakened, he can create the ultimate magic world that is hell for non-magic users, or they'll all die. A little bit vague on that. And that once that happens, he can arrive at the One Magic. The One Magic is, you know, the big mystery of what the One Magic is. I don't remember if we found out in the anime. The manga does eventually come to a fairly concrete answer what the One Magic is, so I'm not going to go into it here, because the exact details of what the One Magic are is not particularly important. What the One Magic is not particularly important to this theory. But so while Precht leaves, he eventually starts researching the One Magic, presumably as a way to bring back Mavis, as I've said. And as we know, he starts to search for Zareth as a result of that. He traces the One Magic back to Zareth, he describes, and from there is like, yeah, I need to bring back Zareth in order to get Mavis back. Or to find the One Magic, which is presumably to get Mavis back. That's my theory. And while that's all definitely a reason, both his meeting with Zareth in 697, and the fact that he has the same curse Zareth has, adds all kinds of layers to that goal of meeting Zareth. You know, could it also perhaps be to get answers about what happened to Mavis and why it happened to Mavis, and maybe, you know, Zareth, having lived with the curse for so many centuries, knows some way to bring Mavis back. Or maybe, in a bit more personal note, perhaps it's just to find some connection with another curse bearer, like Mavis had. You know, perhaps it's also to die. Perhaps there's not quite enough evidence to really support this theory, this particular branch of the theory. But perhaps Hades at some point wanted to die. You know, he's old, he's 130, he's far from the man he used to be. At some point, maybe he just wanted to die. That, of course, with the Curse of Contradiction, of course, the great thing about it is it allows Hades to have all of these goals at the same time. He simultaneously, you know, wants Zareth to bring back the One Magic. He wants to get Zareth to answer questions about what happened to Mavis. He wants some connection. He wants to die. All these things can happen at the same time because the Curse of Contradiction just kind of works like that. Also, Hades having the curse explains why the, sure, kind of gruff and not particularly, friendly man we meet in Zero, but still the ultimately nice guy we meet in Zero. Remember, if you recall in Zero, there's the scene where, Precht, the carriage goes out of control, and Precht, stops the carriage in order to help people, but he still scares them off. It's a really sad scene, whatever. That's not quite my point. But we see in that scene that Precht likes helping people. He helps people all throughout his time in Fairy Tail. And Hades having the curse explains why, by the 780s, he is willing to put all non-magic users through the hell of the ultimate magic world. Much like Xerath before him, he's grown to not really care about what happens to others as long as he gets his way. He knows that if he loves people, they're gonna die, and so he becomes, the evil, scheming guy, much like Xerath did. And maybe at first he was acting like it, and then over time, over 50 years, it just kind of became who he was. But as we know, he wants the one magic. And I think he wants the one magic to revive Mavis, and maybe, possibly, we don't know, cure himself and Mavis of the curse. There's not quite enough to support that theory, but it's an option that Hades having the curse kind of raises. And thanks to the curse, he doesn't really care what happens to the rest of the world as long as Mavis is safe. As long as Mavis is back. At a certain point, he's kind of consumed him. Bring Mavis back. I'm not entirely sure. Of course, we as viewers are well aware that if that was how Mavis came back, Mavis would never be okay with that. But perhaps after a century of trying to bring her back, he's stopped caring about that. He doesn't care how Mavis will react. He cares that Mavis is back. That's his whole goal. So that's my first 2 points. My first 2 points is that, as a refresher, during the course of Precht's time as the Second Master, he was cursed by Ankhtaram and so left. That's point 1. And point 2 is that he searches for Xerath as a way to, both to revive the one magic, as we know, and to potentially get answers about what happened to Mavis and find some connection with the curse bearer. And, he doesn't really care what happens to the world because he has the Curse of Ankhtaram. That's kind of a facet of the Curse of Ankhtaram. So before we get to my third point, just some more stuff we know. Before we get into our final part of his life. Sometime after Precht fully shifts to the dark persona caused by the curse, much like Xerath before him, he creates Grimoire Heart, gathers the Seven Kin of Purgatory, gathers the supposed keys to awakening Xerath that Xerath eventually reveals are just kind of made up. And then in 784, goes to attack Tenro to retrieve Xerath, where Xerath's just kind of peacefully hanging out around his girlfriend's grave. At that point, we do know that Xerath knew Fairy Heart that Mavis was not buried there, so I'm a little confused about, so maybe he probably just wanted to spend some time at her ceremonial grave or at her home. I don't know. I think Xerath was there as part of his connection with Mavis. It's never explicitly said, but that's the most likely answer to me. But anyway, that's a bit of a digression. While there, Hades and Grimoire Heart encounters Fairy Tail members having their S-rank exam, and fights them in order to take control of Xerath. A very important note here, and this is, so, one of the big flaws in my theory, so far, is that people who have the Curse of Ankhtaram use Ankhtaram black magic. We see it a little bit with Mavis when she uses Death Predation over and over again because she can't stop herself. That's what Death Predation does. And Xerath has all kinds of spells that are Ankhtaram black magic spells, a lot of which anime fans have to wait to see. There is one, though, that we do see that I'll get into much later. Not much later, not much longer left in this theory, but by the end of the theory, I'll have that. But there's a very important thing to note. In Chapter 243, or in Episode 117, depending on what version you're watching, at the start of his battle with Team Natsu, at the end of the Grimoire arc, Hades attempts to use a spell called Katsu on Wendy. And we never actually see the full effects of Katsu, thanks to Horologium saving her, but Hades boasts that when he first assumes that she's dead as a result of Katsu, that she is completely annihilated, are the exact words the wiki uses. It is possible, and I personally am of the opinion, that this is a kind of Ankhtaram black magic. We do see Xerath is able to use a bit more direct forms of Ankhtaram black magic besides the rather amorphous Death Predation. That's really all we ever see Mavis using. And so Hades, at this point, with the 50 years of having the curse by now, presumably has some control over Ankh-Saram black magic. And so I personally believe that Katsu is a form of Ankh-Saram black magic. We don't actually find out for sure, though, so that's a little iffy. But either way, Hades loses to Fairy Tail, and during his retreat, Zeref shows up and promptly kills him for his sins. Which leads us to my third point. But wait a second. I thought people with the curse are immortal. Well, not quite. As we saw in 289, of course, we've seen exactly one way to kill a person with the curse of Ankh-Saram, and that is Ankh-Saram black magic. Now, does Hades die from Ankh-Saram black magic? He certainly does not die from Death Predation, because that's not the spell that kills him, given how I think it's Kain Hikaru and Rusty Rose both survive. Death Predation is not that specific, so it would not only kill him, and not kill them, I should say. But, wouldn't you know it, the spell Zeref uses to kill him, which is never named in the manga or in the anime, but the wiki calls it Death Pillar. That spell, Death Pillar, happens to be Ankh-Saram black magic. So, Hades survives for much longer than the average human lifespan, and is killed by Ankh-Saram black magic. So, all of the things we see about him, both those 2 points, and his rather vague transformation from the kind master of fairy tales to the monster he is by the Tenro arc, all make sense in the context of the curse of Ankh-Saram. So, it answers why he's so old, it answers why he left Fairy Tail, it answers why he looks exactly the same 50 years later, why he went dark, and it adds a lot of context to his actions post-Fairy Tail. It adds so many potential meanings to his 50-year search for Zeref. There's all kinds of shit that makes sense when you think, what if he has the Curse of Ankh-Saram? So, I fucking love Precht. After this video, I love Precht so fucking much. There's all kinds of shit about Precht I wish we knew about. I know, I'm not much of a Dragon Ball fan, but I know Dragon Ball got, OVAs about Goku's dad, about future Trunks. I want that style of OVA about the life of Hades. Or maybe a full-on, Zero-style spin-off manga about Hades. That can give us more answers to these questions. But yeah, in conclusion, Precht Gaebolg had the Curse of Ankh-Saram. That much I am 100% certain about. So yeah, that's my theory video. Let me know what y'all thought about it. If you agree with my theory, if you disagree with my theory, let me know if you want to see more videos like this. I don't really have any other burning theories to get out, but it's certainly something that I can make a more common facet of the channel. And yeah, that's really all I have to say for this video. Hope you all enjoyed the video as much as I enjoyed making it and writing it. If you did, feel free to drop me a like or subscribe or fill out that straw poll down below. 4 days left. Or, as always, fuck, that's not the line. Do whatever the fuck you want. I'll see you in the... I talked so long I don't know my own outro. Anyway, goodbye. Keep kicking ass, and I'll see you in the future. Bye!